Welcome to the TTS Talking Educators podcast. Each week, we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration, and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in educational settings. Hello, my name is Mark Loveday, your host for this week's TTS Talking Early Years podcast. I'm the headmaster of Fruin College, an independent co-educational day and boarding school for students aged 7 to 19, specialising in dyslexia and co-occurring specific learning difficulties. I'm a specialist teacher, SLE, Specialist Leader of Education for SEND, and have taught across primary, secondary and sixth form in both mainstream and specialist settings, holding a variety of leadership roles. I've previously set up and led SEND advisory teaching services, been responsible for the creation of diagnostic pathways for dyslexia, dyscalculia and dyspraxia, and created and led an alternative provision for students experiencing emotional-based school avoidance, which went on to win Alternative Provision of the Year in 2023. I'm also a board director for the SPLD Assessment Standards Committee, SASC, a trustee of a multi-academy trust, and a national and international speaker. Throughout this series, we'll be discussing a range of topics aimed at supporting SEN in primary settings, inspiring you with guidance and resources to enhance your practice. I'm delighted to introduce Arran Smith as today's guest. Welcome, Arran. How are you?
I'm very well, Mark. How are you?
I'm good, thank you very much. I'm really good. Before we get started, and before you and I go off on a tangent,
we all do.
Which we will do.
Yeah.
Could you please give a quick introduction about yourself for our listeners?
I'm Arran Smith. I am a severely dyslexic adult that spent the last 20 years working in the field of dyslexia. I previously worked for the British Dyslexia Association as their development officer, and for the last 8 years, I've been an independent consultant in education, supporting education through webinars and training, and also creating the Dyslexia Show, which is now the Neurodiversity Show that I'll plug now, that takes place the 9th and 10th of May at the NEC in Birmingham. But that's we can talk about that at some point over our time.
Absolutely. And I can say we are safely looking forward to joining you there. It's a brilliant show. So we'll get another shameless plug in while we're there, shall we?
Yeah, we will.
At the same point. Right. Well, for the first episode, because I mean, there is so much to unpick, I really would like us to think about looking at kind of the understanding of specific learning difficulties or differences, as I prefer to call them, because I think it is just purely...
Yeah, it is, definitely.
Yeah, and I just don't like that word difficulty. And I think it's focusing on dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, obviously ADHD there as well. However, I'm mindful that, we spoke to Del Pupils on the previous week's podcast. We've done a lot on ADHD. But if we start off with kind of those, the differences and the similarities across those SPLDs, as well as the myths and the kind of associated facts. I think the first one for me really is starting off with the fact that, a specific learning difficulty it's not attached to intelligence, and the fact it is on this spectrum, and I think people still think it is.
I think it's fascinating. I think I'm going to go back one stage though before we do that. I'm going to say that specific learning difficulties, right? I think the one that I've learned of working with young people and adults in the field of dyslexia, the word specific or specific is the most hardest word to say. And I think that's thing. If I look back at my education life, like the word dyslexia was never used. It was always SPLD or specific learning difficulties. And I think that actually it is the thing. And I think that you're right, that there is this myth that is still around today, even though we're over 100 years of knowing about dyslexia. And we've had changes in legislation over the past 15, 20 years where dyslexia has been talked about. And yes, we've gone into the word neurodiversity. We've looked at co-occurring, but actually people still say, well, you're dyslexic, so you're dumb, or you don't actually see things. And that's completely untrue. It's the biggest myth out there that actually is there, because actually I think I was told when I was a child that your brain is bigger than everyone else's, because when scientists have looked at dyslexic brains, because it's to do with either I can never remember if it's the left or the right hemisphere, it's one of the hemispheres, the brain is the same level. So actually that's why some people say it's the intelligent part, but actually it's nothing to do with that. It's just to do with the way that we process information. And that is actually what dyslexia is. How do we process information? How do we store information? And how do we recall information?
Completely.
And that's it's not about things. Yes, I will always call the dishwasher the washing machine, or the tumble dryer the duvet, but that's just me rapidly naming, trying to things and recalling stuff.
Absolutely, and I think you've summed it up really. I think it's that one that will go through our SPLD. I mean, we spent a lot of time the last time unpicking executive functioning with Dale and started talking about executive functioning skills. And I'm really proud here at Arran because we deliver that kind of executive functioning curriculum as part of that discrete teaching, and it really makes such a difference to our learners when you think about neuroplasticity, etc.
Yeah. And I think that with that concept there, though, but also that concept of multisensory structured teaching, and as we know, as you said, you're a specialist dyslexia teacher. I've been taught by many specialist dyslexic teachers. Actually, having that structured program and having it multisensory, having it embedded in that way, actually helps with that recall and that challenge, and having that overlearning, which is the problem with our education system. We just don't have the time to have overlearning. We've got so much we've got to fit in this term, in this week, and unfortunately we are so reliant both across primary and secondary that we have got deadlines from maths in year 4 to SATs in year 6 to even to phonics checks in year 1 and year 2. It's like it's all about testing, and actually, you know what? When we look at it from a dyslexic structure point of view or dyslexia specialist point of view, that's what actually supports a child and actually allows them to succeed.
Absolutely. And I think, this is what I keep coming back to. It's not rocket science. It is that multisensory, cumulative, repetitive approach with a whole brain learning. Yeah. I think the key for me is when you talk about that multisensory, we've got to be stimulating two senses at once. It can't be saying, well, actually, we do worksheets and then actually we have a little bit of a movement break. One, no. What is the activity? I mean, I had my year 7s the other week. We were doing a geography task. It was brilliant because actually we took the contour lines from a map. And we were creating landforms from contour lines with Play-Doh and just looking at the relief and the shape. Now that's that whole brain multi-sensory learning and making sense, and then we can be labeling it with our map and connecting it and making that whole complete connection. But I think people in schools, and particularly in kind of our maintained mainstream schools, we've got such a focus in terms of that bookwork that actually we're just missing completely the whole point of kind of teaching and learning, not only for children with dyslexia, but actually let's flip it on its head. If we could ingrain that whole brain learning for our children with dyslexia, it's going to be good for all children.
It is, and that's the thing. I remember working for the British Dyslexia Association and talking to a group of teachers about dyslexia-friendly schools, and actually there was evidence showed that actually then the quality mark that was delivered by the BDA was showing improvement across the whole school. Not just for them 3 to 4 learners in their classroom. It's that whole school approach that actually changed it, which then ultimately supports with outcomes, which ultimately supports with things like Ofsted grading, and that's what it did, and that was the thing. So to me, actually, it's just logical. It is, but we will quote someone we both know very well, Lorraine Peterson, and that is that we have a 19th century education system to a 21st century intake of students, and it's so true that is still the case now. This is not a political podcast, but you know what? We will say that we have had a change of government. There may be some changes. We are looking for some changes have started to happen. But it'll be interesting to see how education is shaped. But as I've listened on other podcasts, I don't think education is actually a high priority. I don't think that wasn't really, when you look back to previous governments, campaigns have been talking about education. This one really wasn't. So to me, that is the worry. The benefit I see is looking at actually the things that are being announced with committees that are being supported, and that to me actually is positive. I look at it as positive because I always look at positives. I don't like looking at negatives. It's not in my nature to. So I think we just have to keep moving forward and hope for the change.
Completely. I mean, if we think about those diagnostic labels that exist, I mean, yes, again, a lot of it is deep rooted in kind of the DSM guidance, and the ICD guidance. But actually, if we unpick those for people who are sat in listening to this podcast thinking, I'm a little bit unsure about what is what when they talk about this running theme between them, what could that possibly be? So I mean, if we think dyslexia, dyspraxia, dysgraphia, albeit not a diagnostic label, but very much in existence.
Yeah. I think that's that to me. So dysgraphia is one of the things that makes me smile. So I spent 5.5 years working as a dyslexia consultant for Microsoft, and in America, dysgraphia is a label. It is there, very much so. And here in the UK, we don't really use that label, and we kind of use then that label of dyspraxia going into DCD, and that kind of concept. But I think for me, you see that co-occurring, or as I like to call it, neurodiverse, is interesting to see that actually that we see that people with dyslexia may have problems with maths, but may have dyscalculia. And looking at from a dyslexia and maths point of view to a dyscalculia is purely around number sense and the number sense concept, and that's where dyscalculia is. That actually, if you have a young person that doesn't understand number sense. When I mean number sense is knowing that you have two pencils in front of you and two mobile phones. They're exactly the same. They're both two, and that's number sense in my limited explanation there of dyscalculia, which I will be told by the Dyscalculia Network. I should have told it about a lot better.
Janet will be on your case.
I know Janet, Rob, and Kat will both be there. I can see it now. But I think the thing what it is that what we have to do is, and I think this is something that I know me and you've spoken about before, there is a time and a place for a label.
Yes.
But actually, and I know our colleague Becky from Cadmus says this a lot. Actually, if we look at intervention from day one, and that intervention could be very simple, very easily to just change and support small things in the classroom, actually change that child's ability to actually achieve. And that's what we're here to do. That's what education is about. It is. Recently, there was the announcement of the update of the guidance for SEND governors, and actually that was really fascinating for me, because looking at that the gradual response of the now this is where I get it wrong. No, I'm going to not. You're going to have to say assessment, do, review. No, I've said that wrong, but you're going to create it correctly for me.
Assess, do, review. Plan, assess, do, review. Well, I suppose it really does depend where you start on the cycle.
Yeah. That's my dyslexia there. I know it's in my head somewhere, but I don't use it every day, so it doesn't come there. But I think that's a really interesting thing, that actually the owners now have actually explain that to a SEND governor. Now, for me, I know of it, I've heard of it, I've seen documentation, but actually for someone that isn't in our field, actually that's a lot of information they've got to learn. But I think it's down to actually, are both our senior leaders in education following good practice? Are they looking at quality teaching, right? Are they assessing quality teaching in any way possible? And are they then reacting on that? Or are they just reliant on data? And actually, are they not actually seeing it? And actually, that to me is where knowledge becomes really important. So things like listening to podcasts, looking at online training, going to conferences, actually to me, yes, it's really hard because of the way our education system is structured, but actually the concept of CPD should be really important. And that's where this concept of kind of going, actually, you know what, okay, I'm not going to do anything to this child because we don't have a label or I don't have an EHCP. Actually, no, that's not right, right? You can very easily, with no cost, do something, right? And that for me is the thing. It's like there is some amazing resources out there, and there's some amazing support. It doesn't work for every child, but you know what? Changing one thing and not going down that route of going, actually, I'm just going to give them a reading ruler. Yes, reading rulers help a lot of children. That's not a big fix. It's a starting for some children, but not all of them. But I do think kind of just adapting things. It may be okay. Let's give them an extra 5 minutes. How are they going to record something? Do they have to record it in a written format? Can they record it on a digital format? Can they record it in a picture? Right? Can you use an iPad to take a photo? And that changes it, and that's where I think actually the concept of labeling, yes, it's a good idea, yes, it helps some people, but I think actually that co-occurring concept of kind of looking at everyone, they're all different, actually let's pull it all together and go, actually just support their need and think, okay, what do they need the help with?
Absolutely. I think you're right. We always have this conversation, and we're both on the same page with it. And I think it's that label later in life becomes important in terms of Equality Acts, etc. I think the thing for me is we've kind of got to get that filtering through from leadership. And I think,
massively.
in terms of like teacher training, that whole pedagogical approach of, let's be honest, in the early career teacher framework, we're talking about cold calling still. And you're thinking you've got a class full of 30 children that you're just going to cold call. Now, for what realistically in a mainstream classroom now is going to be approximately a third of your class may be neurodiverse, diagnosed or undiagnosed at least, you are going to get about a third of the class bubbling away with anxiety and switching off. Now, if we then tally that with EBSA and emotional-based school avoidance, you can actually see how the two dovetail.
Oh, they do. They massively jump together.
Massively.
And I think the thing about it is that what we've seen from what we've also got is we've got a number of children that have gone through the pandemic where they have missed out on that communication and that interaction time, which you would have in nursery and in foundation levels of schooling. Actually, that is, and I can see that as a school governor. We look at our intake. We've got a cohort of year 5. The percentage of SEN in that 1 year group is huge compared to the rest of the school. And the problem is the system is there. It's so difficult to get that support in. But the school have made decisions to do stuff, and it's down to leadership going, you know what, actually, we have to support every child. And that's what it's down to. And I think that's where, actually, when we look at dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, and going into ADHD, actually, all those things are they're not, I feel they've kind of dropped off the radar a little bit. Like autism, social, emotional, mental health are kind of very high up. We're coming to the end of the podcast, I know that. So let's just kind of go on one thing that actually, when you look at the percentages, there was some research done a number of years ago by Dr. Nancy Doyle as part of her PhD, and it kind of proved that actually that the population that had mental health, this is global, this is UK population, the amount of population that had a mental health disorder that was diagnosed compared to the number of research papers done on it was massively proportionized. So over 1,000 research papers to like 7 or 8%. Where when you look at dyslexia that affects between 10 and 15%, like 20 research papers in the last 10 years. And that to me is where actually there is now this problem that actually that we're underrepresented in academia, which means then that academia policy can't change, that research can't change policy, which means government can't push policy down. That means senior leaders can't make decisions. And that's that cycle that's got to go around again to make us get to where we are today, where we need to be today.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And the fact that we've got to start connecting all of these ideas together and realize that, the one way that we can quickly solve is to do the inverse, and actually let's start at the bottom. What do we need to get it right for our learners? In this case, in our podcast, specific learning differences, neurodiverse needs. What we're getting right there is going to see a positive impact across the board rather than the other way around. I think that's a great place to end this discussion. Really, we've really talked about the differences, the similarities, but the one thing being is actually if we are supporting different styles of learning through that cumulative multisensory whole brain approach, we're going to be getting better outcomes for all.
Massively.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Arran.
Thank you, Mark.
I'd like to say a huge thank you to our guest, Arran, for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Educators podcast with me, Mark Loveday, and Arran Smith. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your settings and links to relevant resources.